Elena Moretti pulled her scarf a little higher, the cold nipping at her cheeks as she stepped onto the familiar corner where Hearth and Crust first opened its doors nearly a decade ago. The sky was still gray with sleep, the streets just beginning to stir, but the bakery's windows glowed warm and golden. A ribbon of cinnamon sugar air coiled into the street, tugging at her heart with nostalgia and unease all at once. She hesitated at the door. The hand-painted sign still swung slightly in the wind, the same one she hung with her late mother when they'd scraped together enough savings to open the place. Back then, it had just been Elena, a used oven, and dreams kneaded into every loaf. Now there were 5 Hearth and Crust locations across the city. 5 storefronts, dozens of staff, and more spreadsheets than sourdough starters. She pushed open the door. The bell gave its familiar jingle. Nobody looked up. Good, she thought, disguised. In a worn green coat, boots scuffed on purpose, and her hair tucked into a slouchy beanie, Elena looked nothing like the polished CEO whose face sometimes appeared in trade magazines. She didn't want to be recognized. Today, she was just a woman with cold hands, craving something sweet. The bakery pulsed with morning rhythm. Baristas steamed milk behind the counter, pastry cases gleamed with croissants stacked like golden fans, and customers clustered near the chalkboard specials. A little girl pressed her nose to the glass, pointing at something with pink frosting. Elena slid into line behind a construction worker and a woman in scrubs. She didn't speak. She listened. There were laughs, compliments about the cranberry scones. Someone asked if Rosie was working today. Rosie. That name again. She'd seen it before. Highlighted in HR reports, circled on customer feedback cards. A young hire barely in her 20s who'd risen fast from cashier to baker's assistant. Elena hadn't met her in person. Not really. Just glimpses through emails and glowing mentions in team meetings. Now as she moved closer to the counter, she spotted her. Behind the barista bar, a young woman with a messy bun and flour streaked. Across her cheek handed off an espresso with practiced grace. Her cheeks were flushed from the heat, and she offered customers a smile that didn't look rehearsed. Not the corporate smile Elena had grown used to seeing, but the kind that reached her eyes. That must be Rosie. Elena stepped up to the counter. Rosie glanced over, warm but distracted. Morning. What can I get started for you? Her voice was bright, but Elena caught it. The faint catch at the edge of her words. The slight dullness in her gaze when no one was looking. Elena, just a slice of the orange zest olive oil cake, please, she said quickly, catching herself from slipping. Old habit. Excellent choice, Rosie said with a faint smirk, jotting it down. It's been my comfort food lately. Elena handed over cash. No loyalty card, no name. Just a polite nod. Then she retreated to a small corner table near the window, close enough to observe, far enough to stay invisible. She watched Rosie for the next hour, watched how she moved through the space like someone who had grown roots there, how she offered extra napkins without being asked, how she remembered regulars' orders, how she crouched to talk to a crying toddler like she had all the time in the world, but she also saw the pauses, the way Rosie would lean on the counter when she thought no one was watching, eyes unfocused, mouth pressed into a flat line. The way she rubbed her wrist when the espresso handle jammed, wincing just slightly. Elena broke off a piece of her cake, letting it crumble in her fingers. She didn't come here expecting heartbreak, but she felt it stirring, just beneath the surface, like a note held too long on a violin string, and she had no idea that the next 5 minutes would change everything. Because just then, Rosie ducked into the back kitchen. And that's when Elena heard the voice. I can't keep doing this, Rosie said softly, but the prep door hadn't fully shut, and the words slipped through like steam through a crack. I need to give notice. I have to take the warehouse job. I hate it, But we need the money. Dad's behind on rent again. My little brother's meds aren't covered. This was supposed to be my dream, but I can't keep pretending I can afford to chase dreams. Elena froze. The slice of cake slid from her fork, untouched, her breath caught. Rosie's voice broke, and in that one moment, the CEO of Hearth and Crust felt the weight of something she couldn't ignore. Not profit margins, not customer counts, but the sound of a dream collapsing. And she knew. This wasn't just a visit anymore. This was the beginning of something else entirely. Elena didn't move. The sounds of the bakery blurred around her. Grinders. Buzzing, espresso steaming, the low hum of conversation. But all she could hear were Rosie's words, still echoing from behind the prep door. This was supposed to be my dream. The weight of that sentence pressed against Elena's chest. Heavier than a balance sheet. More cutting than any bad review. Dreams were supposed to live here. In these walls, in the warmth of rising dough and the comfort of a cinnamon roll shared over laughter. That had been the whole point. The mission. The legacy her mother had started with a single recipe card and a hopeful heart. But somehow, in all the growth and expansion, someone's dream had been quietly slipping through the cracks. Rosie reemerged a minute later, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her smile was back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not this time. Elena stayed in her corner, watching. She needed time. She needed to understand. Over the next hour, Elena watched Rosie work like nothing had happened. She watched her clean up. A spilled latte without scolding the new trainee. She watched her give a half cookie to a boy who'd dropped his. She watched her pause behind the register when she thought no one was looking, eyes glancing toward the kitchen like gravity was pulling her there. This wasn't burnout. This was heartbreak hidden behind kindness. When the rush died down, Rosie disappeared into the back again. Elena waited. Then slowly, she rose from her seat and wandered toward the back hallway, pretending to study a framed photo of the original store. She didn't have to listen long. Rosie was speaking again. This time to a voice Elena didn't recognize. Maybe another kitchen worker. But the words were the same. "It's not that I don't love it here," Rosie said, quieter now. "I do. God, I do. I've never been part of something like this before. It feels like family, like what I thought being a baker would be. But rent just went up, again. And the night shifts at the warehouse pay double what I make here, even with the tips." "You sure you want to leave?" the other voice asked gently. A pause. "No," Rosie whispered, "but I think I have to." Elena backed away before the tears in her eyes gave her away. By the time she returned to her seat, the cake was stale, the coffee cold, but her mind was burning because she'd built this place so people could dream, and someone was about to give that up. She reached into her coat, pulled out her phone, and tapped a message to her assistant. "I need Rosie's file and schedule, now, quietly." The response came almost instantly. "Everything okay?" Elena stared at the bakery floor, watched as Rosie handed a croissant to a teenage girl with a grin that held just a trace of sadness. "No," Elena replied. "But I'm going to fix it." She didn't know exactly how yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Rosie would not leave Hearth and Crust. Not on her watch. The next morning, Elena arrived before the sun. The bakery lights were still off, the street quiet except for the rattle of early delivery trucks. She stood outside in the cold dawn air, her fingers wrapped tightly around a paper cup of gas station coffee. It was bitter and too hot. But that didn't matter. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here for answers. Her assistant had sent Rosie's file overnight. Elena had read it 3 times, each pass tightening something in her chest. Rosie Delgado, age 24, Hired 9 months ago as a part-time baker's assistant. Promoted to lead barista after 4 months. Staff and customer feedback unanimously glowing. Never missed a shift. Volunteered for weekend doubles. She'd become the heartbeat of the morning crew. But her wages? Elena winced. Even with generous tips, it wasn't enough. Not in this city. Not with rent climbing like ivy over every building. Not with a younger sister still in school and an aging grandfather who'd been in and out of the hospital, according to a quiet note in the emergency contact section. Rosie wasn't leaving because she didn't love the job. She was leaving because she was drowning, and doing it quietly, with a smile on her face. By 6:15, the first employees began to trickle in. Rosie arrived last, balancing a paper tray of coffees and pastries she'd clearly bought for the team. She laughed when someone teased her about being late. No one noticed the tired lines beneath her eyes. Elena stayed out of sight, tucked behind a back hallway doorway where she could watch without being seen. Her heart caught in her throat when she heard Rosie speak. "Okay," she said, clapping her hands softly. "Let's knock out the morning like it's our last one before vacation, yeah?" The team whooped and cheered, shaking off the sleep from their bones. No one asked why she chose those words. By the time the doors opened at 7, Hearth and Crust was alive with its usual magic. Coffee steamed, cinnamon filled the air, and regulars filtered in, unaware of the quiet storm building just behind the counter. Elena slid into her usual corner booth. This time, no hoodie, no disguise. She watched as Rosie served a grandmother her usual before she even sat down. She watched Rosie give a toddler an extra whipped cream swirl just because. She watched her dance to an old Taylor Swift song while refilling the pastry case, carefree, like nothing in the world could touch her. But Elena knew better now. At 9:14 a.m., Rosie ducked into the back for a break. That's when Elena stood. She didn't call her assistant. She didn't send an email. She walked behind the counter and, for the first time in weeks, made herself visible. A young cashier blinked when she saw her. "Ms. Hart?" Elena smiled gently. "Can you send Rosie out here?" The cashier nodded, wide-eyed, then disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors. Seconds later, Rosie stepped out, wiping her hands on a dish towel, brow furrowed in confusion. When her eyes landed on Elena, she froze. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Miss Hart?" Elena stepped forward. No preamble, no performance. "I heard what you said yesterday." Rosie's breath caught. "I didn't mean to listen in," Elena continued. "But I did, and I'm glad I did, because you shouldn't have to leave a place you love just to survive." Rosie stared at her, stunned. You were here yesterday?" "I've been here all week," Elena said, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Undercover, watching, listening, trying to remember why I started all this in the first place." Rosie's eyes shimmered. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Elena said. "You reminded me what this place is supposed to stand for." She held out a small folded piece of paper. Rosie took it with trembling fingers. It was her new contract. Promotion to assistant manager, full benefits, and a living wage. A raise that reflected not just her effort, but her worth. Behind her, the entire cafe had fallen silent. "Stay," Elena said softly, "if you still want to." Rosie blinked fast, the tears spilling over now. Then she nodded, and in that moment Elena knew. She hadn't just saved a job, she'd saved a dream. By the time Rosie returned to the counter, eyes red but smiling, whispers had already begun to stir like rising dough. She just hugged the owner. "Wait, that's Elena Hart? I thought she lived in Seattle now." Rosie didn't say much, just slipped back into the rhythm of the cafe with a quiet grace. But her posture had changed. She stood taller, moved slower. like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders after months of being pressed flat beneath it. Elena stayed a few more hours, no longer hiding, yet watching just the same. She noticed the small things first, the way Rosie wordlessly refilled a customer's water before they could ask, how she smoothed a napkin beneath a crying toddler's cup, how she checked the espresso machine for the third time in an hour just to make sure it hadn't slipped pressure again. Elena had seen world-class managers in five-star kitchens, but none had that kind of instinct. Empathy sharpened into muscle memory. But she also saw the others now. Carlos, the senior baker, who flinched when the delivery driver came late. Brooke, the quiet part-timer who locked eyes with Elena from the corner and looked down. Fast, like she was afraid of being seen. Even Raj, the usually boisterous manager on duty, seemed slightly off, rubbing the back of his neck every time a customer raised their voice. There was more going on here than one barista's heartbreak. And now that Elena had opened her eyes, she couldn't unsee any of it. That afternoon, she slipped into the kitchen for the first time since her return. The familiar scent of proofing dough hit her like a memory. Warmth and salt and butter and 1,000 early mornings. Carlos nearly dropped his bowl of laminated dough when he saw her. "Ms. Hart?" he asked, flour dusting the air between them. I didn't know you were in town." "I'm here now," she said softly. "Mind if I watch?" Carlos blinked. Of course not. Elena stood near the prep table, arms crossed gently, watching him work. His hands were skilled. His technique, impeccable. But she noticed the way he winced slightly with each fold, like something deep in his elbow ached more than he let on. "Your arm," she said. Carlos froze. "It's nothing," he lied. Elena tilted her head. "Tendinitis?" He nodded reluctantly. "From the volume. We've been short 2 bakers since January. I'm pulling doubles. But it's fine." "It's not," Elena replied. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Carlos offered a tired smile. "You weren't here." The words stung more than she expected. By the time she left the kitchen, Elena had made a quiet decision. She wouldn't just fix Rosie's contract, she was going to fix everything. The cracks in hearth and crust had been spreading for months, maybe longer. Hidden behind glowing Yelp reviews and trendy latte art was a team holding their breath, pushing past injuries, grief, exhaustion, just to keep the doors open. She hadn't seen it from her penthouse suite in Seattle, but she saw it now, and she would not look away. As she exited the kitchen, Rosie passed by with a tray balanced high. Their eyes met briefly. Neither spoke, but both knew. The oven door had just opened, and something new was beginning to rise. The sun had dipped behind the brick buildings lining the street by the time Elena made it back to her car. She didn't start the engine right away. She just sat there in the silence, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes unfocused. It wasn't just Rosie. It wasn't just Carlos's aching arm or Raj's nervous glances at the clock. There was something deeper, a slow simmer of pressure that had built beneath the polished counters and gleaming pastry cases. The kind of pressure that didn't come from one bad month or a missing shipment, but from being stretched too thin, too long, with no room left to breathe. And somehow, she hadn't seen it. Not until Rosie cried behind a stack of muffin trays. The next morning, Elena returned to the cafe without the hoodie, without the disguise. She walked through the front door not as a customer, but as herself. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Rosie was behind the espresso machine. She looked up and froze, milk steamer hissing behind her like a held breath. Elena offered a soft smile and a gentle nod. "Morning," she said simply. Rosie gave a hesitant wave back, then returned to tamping espresso. But the tremble in her hands said everything. "Meeting in the back," Elena announced. 10 minutes. "Everyone." The room stayed quiet for a heartbeat longer than it should have. Then chairs scraped, aprons untied. and slowly, one by one, the staff filed into the break room. It wasn't a big space, just a corner nook with mismatched chairs, a fridge with a broken handle, and a whiteboard that still read, "Muffin Rotation, Kaksh, Life." Elena stood at the front, hands folded, heart pounding in a way that felt absurd for someone who had spoken at investor summits and culinary expos across the country. But this was different. This was home. "I owe you all an apology," she began. There was no preamble, no slide deck, just the sound of a woman who had finally stepped back into her own kitchen. "I left Hearth and Crust in the hands of people I trusted, and while I was off building expansion, plans, pitching franchises, you were here, holding this place together with duct tape and double shifts." A few heads lowered. Rosie's eyes stayed on the floor. "I thought the numbers looked fine. I thought the reviews meant everything was working. But yesterday, I saw something that shattered that illusion." She looked directly at Rosie. "I heard someone crying in the back, thinking no one would ever hear her. I watched another employee wince with every fold of dough. I saw kindness breaking under the weight of silence." Rosie blinked hard. Carlos clenched his jaw. "And I realized," Elena said quietly, "this place has become something I never wanted it to be." She paused, letting the silence land. "I can't undo the stress I've allowed to build here, but I can fix what comes next." She pulled a folder from her bag and set it on the table. "These are new contracts, full-time hours for those who want them, guaranteed health benefits, a living wage that reflects the cost of this city. And for those of you who've been here since the early days," she looked at Carlos, "back pay. You've earned it." The silence cracked. A soft gasp from Brooke. A sniffle from Raj. "And Rosie," Elena continued, her voice gentler now, "your schedule? It's already been adjusted. I'll cover what you can't. Your job isn't just secure, it's respected." Rosie's eyes welled up, but this time, she didn't turn away. "You don't have to quit your dream to survive your reality," Elena said. The room was still. Then, slowly, Carlos clapped. Then Brooke. Then the whole team. It wasn't raucous applause. It was quiet, grateful, real, just like the work they did every day. As the team filtered back into the cafe, some wiping their eyes, others exchanging uncertain smiles, Elena remained standing in the break room, alone again. But this time it wasn't because she was apart. It was because she was about to start over, not as a boss above them, but as a leader beside them. And for the first time in years, it felt like the cafe was finally about to rise again. By the end of the week, something in the air at Hearth and Crust had changed. It wasn't visible at first glance. The walls still bore their chalkboard menus. The same playlist hummed in the background, and the scent of rosemary focaccia drifted through. The space like always. But underneath it all, there was a different rhythm. Carlos no longer winced when he moved trays of dough. Elena had insisted he take 2 paid days off to visit the doctor, and when he returned, elbow-wrapped, smile soft, he brought tamales for everyone and didn't argue when she told him he was moving to prep instead of the heavy lifting. Rosie still arrived early. Still worked the register and the espresso machine like clockwork, but there was something different in her shoulders, less weighed down, less guarded. During the afternoon lull, she even started humming again. Elena heard it from the office and nearly cried. The biggest change, though, came on Saturday morning. A line had formed around the block, not unusual for the weekend crowd. But this time, people weren't just there for the honeycomb croissants or the seeded sourdough. They were there because of the story. Word had gotten out, first from whispers, then from social media. A thread had gone viral. "My best friend works at this bakery and just told me the CEO went undercover and changed everyone's lives after hearing her barista crying. This is what leadership looks like." Elena hadn't planned for the attention. She certainly hadn't planned for the flood of supportive comments, the offers of donations, or the local reporter who'd called 3 times. But standing in the kitchen, flour on her apron, her team bustling around her with a quiet energy she hadn't felt in years, she knew this was where she needed to be, in the heart of it, not behind. A spreadsheet, not at a conference table. Here, among the ovens and the people who made Hearth and Crust what it was. At 11 a.m., Rosie poked her head into the kitchen. "Someone's asking for you," she said, grinning. "And she brought a camera." Elena blinked. "A camera?" Rosie nodded. "That news crew? From Channel 7? They're outside." Elena wiped her hands, heart racing. Outside, a reporter stood with a cameraman, microphone in hand. "Ms. Vega? Would you mind saying a few words? The city's talking about your bakery, about the changes, about the kindness." Elena hesitated. The spotlight had never been what she wanted, but behind the reporter, she saw customers waving, smiling. A little girl holding a cinnamon bun almost the size of her face. She stepped forward. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said, voice calm but clear. "I just listened. I remembered that every business is only as strong as the people who carry it every day, and I chose to act, because when you have the power to ease someone's burden, you should." The reporter lowered her mic, eyes glistening. Inside, Rosie watched through the window. Next to her, Carlos passed out samples of the new lemon basil scones. "Boss is famous now," he said, nudging her gently. Rosie smiled. "Yeah," she whispered. "But more importantly, she's finally home." And with that, Hearth and Crust wasn't just a bakery anymore. It was proof that compassion still rises, like bread in warm light, when someone dares to stop and listen. The following Monday, Elena did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled one of the cafe's wooden tables into the kitchen during pre-opening and set 6 mismatched chairs around it. The usual smell of cinnamon and proofing yeast mingled with fresh coffee as her team trickled in, confused but curious. "What's going on?" Carlos asked, eyeing the setup. Elena smiled. "Family meeting." Rosie walked in with flour smudged across her cheek. "Are we getting fired as a group?" she joked, only half kidding. Elena gestured for everyone to sit. "You're not getting fired. You're getting a voice." The team settled, looking at one another with cautious anticipation. "I built this place because I love the way bread brings people together," she began. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot to invite my own team to the table." She looked at Rosie. "At first, I thought the best way to lead was to be behind the scenes, to solve problems without anyone seeing me do it. But I see now that's not enough." She placed a notepad and a pen in the center of the table. "I want to hear from you. What do you need? What's not working? What dreams do you have, here or outside these walls? And how can we build something that supports them?" No one spoke at first. Then Carlos cleared his throat. "Can we get a better mop? That one we've been using smells like wet dog." Laughter broke the silence. Rosie leaned forward. "Can we rotate positions more? I'd love to learn prep if someone could show me." Alicia, the quietest baker on staff, said softly, "I'd like to do one of the specials. I have an old family recipe, almond and guava tartlets." Elena nodded, taking mental notes, eyes misting without shame. This was the bakery she had dreamed of, not just in aesthetics or profits, but in spirit. A place where people weren't just employees. They were collaborators, dreamers, family. By the end of the hour, the table was covered in crumbs, scribbled ideas, and empty coffee cups. But the energy was electric, like a sourdough starter finally, bubbling after a long sleep. As they stood to open for the day, Rosie lingered. "I was going to quit that day," she said quietly. "I'd packed my apron and everything. I thought if I had to let go of my dream, at least I'd do it cleanly." She looked up at Elena, her voice steady. "But you let me keep it. You saw me. Not just the worker. Me. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. I always saw you, Rosie, she said. I just needed to remember how to show it. Outside, the line was already forming. Inside, the ovens were full. And for the first time in a long time, every seat at the table was taken by people who belonged. The following days unfolded like dough rising. Quiet at first, then suddenly full of life. The changes didn't come all at once, but like a good sourdough, they started deep in the culture, in the way people spoke to one another, how they moved. Through the small kitchen, how they started staying after their shifts, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Rosie, once uncertain, had a new lightness in her step. She began sketching cake ideas in the margins of her prep sheets. One afternoon, Elena found a crumpled notebook next to the mixer. On the cover it read, "Things I'd make if I wasn't scared." Inside were handwritten ideas. Lavender honey, shortbread, rosemary caramel glaze, a coconut sponge with lime curd and torched meringue. The handwriting was messy, some pages stained with chocolate fingerprints, but the heart in every word was unmistakable. Elena didn't say anything at first. She just added a sticky note on one of the pages. Next week's special? Rosie found it later that night and stared at it for a long time, as if afraid it would vanish. She didn't speak about it, but the next day she arrived early. And by mid-afternoon, the first batch of coconut lime cakes was cooling on the racks. Elena gathered the team. This is Rosie's. Try it. Tell your friends, and tomorrow we add it to the display. The room erupted with supportive cheers. Rosie blushed furiously, but for once didn't retreat. She stood proudly behind the counter that next morning, watching as customer after customer pointed to her creation behind the glass, saying, "What's that one?" She'd quietly reply, "It's something new." Outside, the city moved on, as it always did. People commuting, phones ringing, taxis honking. But inside that tiny corner bakery, a young woman who almost gave up her dream was now feeding it to others, one slice at a time. Elena stood near the doorway, a cup of black, coffee warming her hands, watching the morning unfold. She wasn't behind the register or in the office. She didn't need to be. The place ran with a rhythm that came from more than recipes and rules. It came from heart. And from the back kitchen, someone called out with laughter, "Rosie, they're asking for the lime cake again. Better get that notebook ready." She smiled and grabbed her pen. The bakery wasn't just a business anymore. It was becoming something more. 2 weeks later, the bakery's soft opening for its new evening concept, Golden Hour at Elena's, drew in a line that curled down the block. It wasn't just the smell of pastries or the novelty of late-night almond croissants. It was the buzz around a bakery where the staff felt like family and where something real, something honest, was being served behind the counter. Rosie stood at the new dessert bar, nervously arranging her signature coconut lime cakes next to lemon tarts and raspberry pistachio slices. Elena hovered nearby, hands behind her back, letting Rosie take the lead but ready to step in if needed. She never had to. A local food blogger posted a reel, Rosie piping meringue with the steadiness of someone who now believed her work belonged in the spotlight. The caption read, "A rising star in a hidden corner of the city. Don't miss this." The team buzzed with energy. Martin, the bread baker who rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time, had stayed an extra hour to help polish the counters. Sarah, the new hire who'd once looked terrified of the espresso machine, now joked with customers as she poured lattes with leaf art on top. But the moment that stopped Elena, cold came quietly, too quietly for anyone else to notice. Rosie stood, alone near the sink, apron dusted with flour, her phone pressed to her ear. Elena didn't mean to overhear, but as she passed by, she caught a whisper. "Yeah, Mom. They kept me on. No, I'm not leaving. She helped. I can pay rent. I even have savings now." A pause. "I think this is home." Elena ducked into the kitchen, pretending to check on the ovens, heart swelling. That night, after closing, the team lingered with leftover cake scraps and stories that spiraled into laughter. Elena stood up with a quiet clap. "I was going to wait, but there's no better time," she said. She turned to Rosie. "You don't just work here anymore. Starting next month, you're officially our assistant pastry chef. Full benefits, creative direction, and if you're up for it, your own seasonal menu board." The bakery erupted. Rosie froze, eyes wide. "Me?" Elena nodded. "You. The girl who almost quit her dream because she thought no one would notice her leaving." "We noticed. We always noticed." Rosie blinked fast, covering her face with both hands before pulling Elena into a hug that said everything words couldn't. The team clapped, cheered, and someone tossed a dish towel in the air like confetti. The bakery had always sold warmth, sugar, and comfort. But tonight, it offered something far more powerful, a reminder that no one rises alone, and that sometimes the smallest act of listening can become the biggest moment in someone's life. The ovens were off, the lights dimmed, but in every corner of the bakery, the warmth lingered. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the front windows of Elena's bakery like gold dust, catching the steam from freshly baked cinnamon rolls as they cooled on the counter. The aroma of yeast, sugar, and roasted espresso beans wafted through the space, familiar and comforting, but something had shifted. The air wasn't just warm, it was alive. Rosie was already there before sunrise, not because she had to be, but because she wanted to be. She wore a fresh apron and a quiet smile, humming softly as she arranged the morning display. Gone was the girl who nearly walked away from her dream in silence. In her place stood someone steady, someone seen. Elena stepped inside with 2 coffees in hand. "You beat me?" she teased, handing Rosie one. Rosie grinned. "Couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about cake." Elena laughed, sipping hers. "You're going to do incredible things here." They stood in the stillness, watching the first few regulars gather outside, peeking in with sleepy smiles. The bakery wasn't just reopening, it was reborn. Later that day, Elena made a quiet post on the bakery's social media. A photo of Rosie holding a tray of her signature cakes, her expression full of pride and possibility. The caption read, "Behind every counter is someone fighting a battle you can't see. This place isn't just about sugar and flour, it's about people, their stories, their second chances. And if you ever need one, we'll be here, with a slice of something warm and kind." The comments poured in. Customers shared stories. Old employees reached out. A reporter called, asking to do a piece on the bakery that listens. By the end of the week, a small plaque appeared above the register. Simple, understated, but powerful. "This bakery runs on kindness, and every person here matters." And they did. Rosie, Martin, Sarah, every one of them. Elena had started her journey hoping to find what was broken. Instead, she found something to build, a workplace that didn't just survive, but healed, thrived, and reminded people what compassion could look like. And as the last customer left that night with a warm almond croissant wrapped in tissue and a soft "see you tomorrow," Elena flipped the sign to closed and exhaled. Not because the day was over, but because something new had begun. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that behind every counter is a heart carrying its own quiet storm, subscribe. We're telling real stories inspired by real people who show up, stay kind, and keep going. Stick around, because the next story might just be yours. As the sun set and the last customers trickled out of the bakery, the soft hum of the kitchen filled the air. Elena leaned back against the counter, watching Rosie carefully arrange the remaining cakes in the display, a satisfied smile on her face. It wasn't just about the bakery anymore. It was about the people who breathed life into it, the ones who weren't just employees, but were a part of something bigger. Rosie caught Elena's eye and paused for a moment. "Do you think I'll ever be good enough?" she asked, the hint of vulnerability in her voice. Elena smiled softly, setting down the towel she'd been wiping down the counter with. "You already are. You've always been. But now, you know that, don't you?" Rosie's face lit up, her shoulders relaxing as if a weight had been lifted. She didn't just have a job anymore. She had purpose. She had a future. And that future was unfolding before her, right here in this bakery. As Elena watched her, she realized that sometimes the greatest thing you can do isn't just to build something successful. It's to build something that gives people the courage to see their worth, to chase their dreams, and to know they have a place where they matter. It wasn't just flour and sugar that made this bakery special. It was the heart behind it, the understanding that everyone from the baker to the customer was part of a story bigger than themselves. And that was the story Elena wanted to share. If this story touched you, if you believe that kindness, compassion, and second chances can change lives, then subscribe and stay tuned. Because here, every story has a heart, and every heart has a place. Join us, and let's keep sharing stories that matter.